Right, good evening, Uber drivers and black cabbies. My name's Danny Whitaker. This is My Own Worst Enemy, mental health podcast. Okay, I haven't got very much to chew your ear off about this week. Been a bit of a quiet week for a change. No developments on the war with the neighbours as of yet. But yeah, that's great for me. Nothing I love more than a bit of peace and quiet. But don't suppose it makes for a very interesting podcast intro, especially when your podcast intro is usually based around you moaning about something. One thing, I suppose, worth mentioning is it's the 23rd September today, and the very first episode of this podcast, which was on depression with Professor Chris Dowrick, that was released back on the 20th of September last year. So we're officially 1 year old, folks. I'm not going to do anything special for it, to be honest. I didn't even realise it had been a year till I was just sort of scrolling through my SoundCloud page of the day and just suddenly realised, like, oh shit, I've been doing this a year now. So yeah, happy birthday to us, I suppose. I have got a few announcements to make, actually, sort of related to this, but I think I'm going to save all that for the next episode. The next episode is going to be something a little different, something I maybe should have done a while ago, and something that's going to sort of push this whole project forward in a slightly new direction as well, I think. But that's all I'm going to say for now. It's called a teaser, that, ladies and gentlemen. Little marketing trick. Greased you up, got you all hot and bothered, but didn't finish you off. So hopefully you'll come back next week now to find out what the hell's going on. Okay, this week, got a lovely topic for a birthday celebration. We're talking about postnatal depression. Jesus. Actually, I suppose it's kind of a bit of a tenuous link there, maybe. Baby being born, birthday? No? Whatever. Right, my guest today is Elaine Hanzak. Elaine is an author and speaker who uses her experience with postnatal depression and bereavement to deliver keynote presentations on overcoming loss and perinatal mental health. She's the author of 2 books, the first being Eyes Without Sparkle, A Journey Through Postnatal Illness, which today's discussion is based on, and the follow-up, Another Twinkle in the Eye, Contemplating Another Pregnancy After Perinatal Mental Illness. In 2016, Elaine was nominated for the Cheshire Woman of the Year Award for her contribution to community services, and in 2017, she was a finalist at the British Journal of Midwifery Awards in the category of contribution of a non-midwife to midwifery practices. In today's episode, Elaine shares her experience of postnatal depression, how despite dreaming of motherhood her entire life, traumatic labour, months of sleep deprivation and the pressures of aspiring to be the perfect mum eventually caused her to spiral into a period of depression, self-harm, psychosis, and eventually being admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Having since made a full recovery, Elaine tells us what the experience has taught her about motherhood and life, and she also offers some simple self-care practices to help future mums avoid a similar fate. I really enjoyed this episode. Elaine, really nice. I think she sets a really good example for mums who are sort of going through this sort of shit, because yeah, as you'll hear, she went through the worst of it and managed to come out the other side. And yeah, I think it's really inspiring to hear those kinds of stories, especially if you're one of those people that's sort of in it right now, in the thick of it. So yeah, and I'm going to start doing a lot more episodes based around lived experience because, well, for one, they're a lot more relaxed than the clinical episodes and don't take quite as much research to do. But also, I think it's probably just a lot more relatable for people to listen to. So yeah, you can follow Elaine on Twitter. She's at Elaine Hanzak. That's Elaine Hanzak, Hanzak. If you'd like to comment on this episode, you can do so by going to myownworstenemy.org. If you feel this podcast is adding any value whatsoever to your week, please do consider supporting it. You can make a monthly or one-off donation for as little as £1, or you can buy one of our Moody Gear t-shirts as well, that we've just launched recently. Just go to myownworstenemy.org/support. Anyway, enough chitter-chatter. I've actually got a fish finger sandwich waiting for me in the kitchen, like a bleeding 6-year-old. I've got the house to myself this weekend. Leanne and the kids are at her mum's house, so of course I've immediately reverted to living like a bachelor and my maturity levels dropped by about 75%. Actually, right, while we're at it, let me give you a little tip about making a decent fish finger butty, right? Very passionate about this, right? If you're a fan of fish finger butties, you'll know that they're notoriously difficult to handle because the bread sort of gets all soggy and they get all flappy and fall to pieces, and then, one wrong move, an entire fish finger falls out and winds up on the floor for the dog. So, the trick to a firm, reliable fish finger butty, okay? 1, lightly toast the bread, okay? Not till it goes brown or anything like that, not actual toast, just to sort of firm the bread up a little bit so it can handle the moisture a bit better. Then, step 2, when you put the fish finger on the bread, don't just lie them across the bread like a little stick or whatever. Mash them in a bit with a fork and sort of spread it about like paste, because then the fish fingers can't fall out then. You can do what you want with the butty, toss it up in the air, spear it on your finger, do whatever. And then that's it. You've got a firm fish finger butty that won't fall to pieces. So, see, look at that. Not only improving your mental health, this podcast, but turning you into a better chef as well. See, what more do you want? How this podcast wasn't nominated for a Mind Media Award this year, I'll never know. Right, anyway, as always, please enjoy my conversation with Elaine Hanzak. Okay, Elaine Hanzak, welcome to my little corner of the podosphere. Thank you for joining me.
You're welcome, Danny. I'm delighted to be here.
Good. Okay, today's episode is we're talking about postnatal depression, and from a lived experience perspective. So from your personal experiences rather than from a clinical perspective. But as always, before we go diving into the story, if you could just give us a little brief introduction about who you are, what you do, why you do it, and then we'll get stuck into it from there.
Okay. I'm now, let's say, comfortably middle-aged, and my period of postnatal depression was now actually 21 years ago. My son's just turned 21. And the reason I shared my story was because when I was so ill 21 years ago, very few people spoke about mental illness. And I certainly didn't think I was the type that would get it because I was a teacher. And my family and I went through an absolute hell at the time. Yet the happy ending is I've come through it. And I guess I learned many lessons along the way with it. And it's those I wish to share. I think the biggest lesson was that I possibly could have helped myself far more than I actually did because I was so scared and I had the stigma that mental illness didn't affect someone like me. I now know it can and does affect many, many of us. And if you are brave enough and open enough to ask for help before even you need it, then just maybe you won't become as ill as I did. I've since written a couple of books about it, and the last 12 years I've spent my time giving conferences, lectures, talks, and sharing my story, and along the way encouraging others with their journey of mental health as well.
Okay, perfect. And we're going to get onto these practical tips, these things you've discovered along the way. We'll get towards them towards the end.
Yes.
But now, if you don't mind, I'd like you to take us all the way back to the beginning. Before babies.
Okay.
Before all this started, to little Elaine. So who was little Elaine? Where did she grow up?
Little Elaine was the second child to my parents. We lived up in Fleetwood in Lancashire. Just most people will be aware of Blackpool. Well, go seven miles further north, and that was Fleetwood. And my dad was involved with fire and safety at the big ICI chemical industry, and my mum stayed at home, which many mums did in the 1960s. And they had my brother. And 2.5 years later, I came along. And apparently, they really didn't feel I was from the same parents because my brother was a model baby and child. And I appeared and I cried, I screamed. I generally needed and wanted attention unless I was given lots of fuss. And really, all these years on, I'm still the same. And as I grew up, I always had that inbuilt desire, I think, right from being able to walk and talk, of loving other children, babies. And I grew up with my ambition in life was literally, Danny, to be a mum.
Mm-hmm.
I had no great aspirations to be a air hostess or anything particularly like that. It was to be a mum. And although we didn't have a lot of finance back then, we had a lot of love in abundance in the family. And I just enjoyed family life. When I was 10, my mum told us that she was having another baby. I think I had contributed in that because for so many years I'd said how much I wanted a baby brother or sister. And I remember mum getting fatter and fatter and eventually disappearing off one night and to be told, mum, you've got a baby sister. And mum came home a few days later. And my little sister had read all the right books on being a baby. She was very well behaved. And in a way, she had two mums because she was my living and walking baby little doll, really. Well, not walking at first, of course, but I loved caring for her. And that really was my blueprint that, this was my almost trial to become a mum myself one day.
Yeah, I think I've got to be honest, Elaine, I think it's an underrated ambition. I think
Yes.
motherhood is kind of talked down and stuff nowadays, and everyone's expected to, go off and get some sort of corporate career. But let me tell you, right, from personal experience, when I was at home with my little boy, my other half, she went back to work after about 5 months, I think, and then it was me staying at home looking after the little boy. That's one hell of a job, and I had a lot of support around me. So yeah, I've got a lot of admiration for mums, especially single mums. It's like I say, it's a underappreciated occupation, I think. The reason I like to go back all the way to the beginning is, it's kind of a known thing in mental health that our pasts can sort of have an effect on our future. But what's interesting is you just already said then that you had great upbringing, loving family, everything was great. So in that sort of same vein as foreshadowing, what were the teenage years like? Was there anything along the way there that kind of foreshadowed what would eventually happen?
There was a psychiatrist that years later I was on a radio program with, and she said, Elaine, I could have predicted you'd have been ill. And her reason was that I actually was a school teacher. At the time I was mid-30s, and she said, there's something about school teachers. You are so organised. You have lived your life by planning, evaluating, task analysing things. You live your life by term times and the countdown to 2 weeks, 3 days to the summer holidays, whatever it is. And your life is a big list. And that was very true. In my teenage years, I guess, like many teenage girls, lad mad, as my mum would say.
Yeah.
And did all the usual teenage things, but always with my little sister around as well. And I just loved being with her, playing with her, doing things with her. And I decided that I wanted to be a teacher. And as my mum said, great job to be a mum because you get the long school holidays. So really that was my blueprint. Also, as we grew up, my brother, sister and I, we were given lots and lots of opportunities that my parents felt that they hadn't had as children. So really every night after school, I was busy with something. I did guides, I did dancing class, I went to even elocution lessons because mum thought it would be good for character building and confidence. I went to dancing class. Every night there was something that I was busy with. And it was not that mum and dad were very pushy, not in the slightest, and I loved all of these activities. What it did for me was build my personality into one of those people who's always busy. I never know the concept of being bored. I can relax when I need to, but there's always another plan to be made, another list to be written, to be organised, and I've got to do this and I'll just do that. So I think along with that and then going off to college and doing my teaching degree, again, it was all on a plan. that I wanted to be married by my mid-20s. I wanted to give up teaching then, and I wanted to be a full-time mum. That was my ambition. So I'd never had any mental health challenges in my teenage years as a family with no history of it. So really my blueprint was set, the plan was made. I was going to be a mum one day, and that was it.
And is that exactly how it went as well? Did everything go to plan up to getting pregnant?
Pretty well, yes. Yes, it did. And apart from the fact that because we'd got ourselves a rather large house and I hadn't got my facts right, I thought on maternity leave you got full pay and all kinds of things, and financially we realised that I would actually have to go back to work. So that maybe was one of the first things that was the plan not going to plan.
Right, just kind of just jumping back a minute now, because this sort of twigged with me when you were saying that so you spoke to a psychiatrist on this radio program, and she said she could have predicted it. Did she sort of elaborate on that at all? Because it sounds it sounds a bit of a leap for, you know, to say that because somebody's very well organised, that they're likely to go on to get like postnatal depression. Is that because, did you go above and beyond just being organised? Are we talking about kind of being very perfectionistic, maybe a bit of a control freak, everything has to be in order, that kind of thing? Or was it not quite that
really
yet?
It wasn't quite that extreme. I would put myself down as an organised person, and I like to feel that I'm efficient and I'm an asset as opposed to a hindrance to wherever I work and whatever I'm doing. The psychiatrist in question had based that on the fact that every 2 years there's a report that comes out that actually looks into the suicides of new mums, called the Embrace Report. Or CMATCH is another word for it as well. And apparently there was one particular study that they did do, or one set of figures, that showed that the person most likely to take their own life in the perinatal period was actually a mid-30-something-year-old school teacher. Wow. Yeah. So that was, and again, she said personality-wise that is we tend to think of maternal deaths as maybe, I certainly previously did, anybody that got extremely severe postnatal depression, which, and mine actually did end up being, I was diagnosed with puerperal psychosis in the end. That you tend to find they are the high flyers, the very high level functioning ladies who potentially have got good education, good families, the great big tick list really of everything that you're supposed to be in our society. So that was what that was based on. And I think in retrospect it was a lot to do with expectations. I had high expectations on myself, which I wanted to live up to rather, and because of that, I had a bigger drop and a bigger fall to have from that very high expectation right down to almost being suicidal.
So are you kind of like hard on yourself if you don't meet those targets that you set for yourself?
I can be, yes. And these days I'm far more gentle on myself. Right. I actually get quite proud when I see some dust in the house, and I think, do you know what? It really doesn't matter. Yeah. It doesn't matter if the cushions aren't straight. And there's almost a sense of pride in myself now. And I think, yeah, do you know what? I actually left the house this morning. I didn't make the bed. Wow.
I'm pretty good at that, Elaine.
Yes.
Right, okay, so I'm very, very interested in this. So if you don't mind me asking, how old were you when you got pregnant?
I was 32.
32. So yeah, when a girl's been waiting 32 years to get pregnant, how did you find out? Where was you? Just, yeah, tell us that little story. And were you ecstatic? Were you shocked? What was that all like?
I was absolutely desperate to get pregnant. And I know my son was conceived on actually my birthday, 4th of August.
Okay.
And then we actually went on holiday with my parents, and my mum said she knew straight away I was pregnant because for the previous 2 or 3 months I'd told her, oh no, it's not happened, it's not happened. And she said by my very silence, she knew that perhaps something was happening. And then when we got back off the holiday, I sent my husband to go and get a pregnancy testing kit. And he came back and yes, I was pregnant. And I was absolutely thrilled to bits, to say the least. I really was. So it was all my Christmases and birthdays all were coming together all at once. I was ecstatic.
Now, I remember when Leanne got pregnant with our first Roman. It was great and everything, but for me, it was just kind of panic stations the entire time. I'm very pessimistic. We're just waiting for something to go wrong the entire time. I found, or easy for me to say as the guy, but I found the pregnancy quite stressful and worrying. What was yours like? What was the pregnancy like for you?
It was one big list. I think I was one of those annoying women that, within about 2 hours of conception, the hospital bag was packed just in case. I devoured all the pregnancy books, all the pregnancy magazines. I knew exactly how big the fetus was at 10 weeks, 2 days and 32 seconds.
Right.
And I think I probably went into my booking in appointment with the midwife already knowing it all, or so I thought. And I made lists. I look back now at some of the preparation I was doing at the time, and I just shake my head in disbelief at myself. I guess I was just so hyper and so excited about it, with only the occasional feeling of, and I'm going to have to go back to work. That probably was my only negative thought through it all. The rest was just pure and utter excitement about it. And physically, I bloomed, I blossomed until towards the end of the pregnancy, when foolishly, rather than get up 5 times to nip to the toilet in the night, I decided I'd not drink anything after the evening meal and ended up giving myself water infections. And I had a couple of stays in hospital, and all that did, Danny, was just refine my list even more, right. Because I knew the extra little bits I needed to put in my hospital bag. And being on the antenatal ward, you would witness other women going into birth. And I'd like to say I'm not normally an envious, jealous type of a girl, but I'd be absolutely green with envy as other people wheeled off in labour thinking it's not my turn yet. But I'd also watched and experienced people in the early stages or latter stages of labour, and the ones that had been to the NCT classes who stood at the end of the bed practising their breathing. And then I'd hear others behind the curtain saying, "You're not coming anywhere near me." So it was all added education as to, how my birth was going to be, which of course was going to be perfect.
Well, that's it. So what did this perfect list look like for how the birth was going to look and how it was going to go? Was it going to be kind of, are we going for a water birth with candles and that sort of thing?
How did you guess? Oh, yes. I was quite happy to give birth in hospital. And when I had the show round, because of course I did all the antenatal classes, everything you're supposed to. And I went to the hospital and they said, the only room that had been recently redone was the new water birth suite. And a bit like Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman or whatever, or Richard Gere, it was the best room, had to have it.
Yeah.
So of course the water birth suite was on my list. And the thing is, as a school teacher, if you have your baby late April, it means that just as maternity leave is ending, guess what? Some holidays start. And my son was due on the 26th of April. So, there was planning that went into that. And I went into labour on the evening of the 25th, tick. Was told in the early hours of the 26th that just see if you can sleep for a while, have a warm bath and then come in, which we did, tick, on the right day.
Yeah.
And of course, it's all on the list, water birth suite, not quite the candles playing, but certainly the panpipes playing, the facial spray ready and all of these things that were all on the list. And it started out that way. And I often say when I speak to midwives, please, will you go in looking a mess? Because I'm not kidding you, the midwife who was looking after me was stunning. She looked like she could have just come off the cover of Hello magazine. Beautiful face, immaculately made up, gorgeous hair, lovely personality. And there you are as a blob in this water with all unmentionables floating around, and she's chatting to your husband. It's just not on. So I always say to student midwives, please go in looking a mess. It makes us feel so much better.
Oh, I don't know that it would, Elaine. I think if your midwife came in looking like a right scruffy pig, I think you'd worry.
Yeah. There must be a medium line somewhere. But, and I remember we went in and we were told, oh, yes, you're so many centimetres dilated, tick. We have the staffing for the water birth suite, tick. And yes, in you go. So it started off as it was supposed to. I even remember a very breathy George Michael number playing on the radio and things. And yeah, it was all going as it should have done.
Yes, but then ... So, yeah, it starts to go wrong at some point. Your plans go out the window. What happens next?
Baby's in distress. I have to get out of the pool. And then all of a sudden I felt like I wasn't actually in the room. I was actually watching from the corner up in the ceiling. And the room changed from being this lovely, lovely experience I thought it was going to be until almost a feeling of panic. With the room almost seemed like it had 12 doors in it. And there's suddenly this sea of people around me asking me to push and pull and all kinds of different things. And eventually my son was born, but the cord was round his neck. And they immediately had to whisk him off because, of course, they were very concerned about him. So he was instantly taken away. And for 32 years, I'd looked forward almost to that lovely skin-on-skin moment. And it didn't happen. And then I'm being told, come on, Elaine, you've got to get the placenta out. And I'm thinking, but I'm not a cow. I'd seen, vet films with that mention, but I didn't have one.
Right.
And, brain, body just wasn't connecting at all. I'd read all the books, but, nothing was making sense. And eventually I was told I had to go to theatre. At which I honestly thought, why, what's on? And it just, nothing was making sense. And eventually I was wheeled off with still never having held my son. And someone said, oh, Elaine, your baby's waving at you. And his father was there cradling him, waving his little arm at me and saying, bye-bye, mummy.
Oh, but by this time you knew that everything was okay with the baby?
Not particularly. I was just out of it. I found out afterwards I had what they called a retained placenta and postpartum hemorrhage. So I was, well, as they told me the following day, had it been 20 years earlier or a home birth, I actually would have died. So it wasn't good. Wasn't good at all.
So do you remember coming round? Do you remember the first time you got to hold your son?
I do. And as I woke up, I think that was my first thought, I'm alive, because I just drifted off into blackness. And I remember thinking and actually feeling my body, of course I was flat, and thinking I still had this huge tummy, thinking they've left the baby in there. And I had drips, monitors, tubes, all kinds of things. And eventually the lovely midwife gave me my son to hold, but I had to just keep my back flat and rest him on my thighs, as it were. And I remember having that overwhelming love that people talk about. And I also can understand why people who've been through a traumatic experience like that don't have that initial bond, because this thing could be an alien, this little being. But for me, I did have that rush of love. I really, really did. And I had very intensive nursing for that first 12 hours.
So you didn't feel like because you'd missed that, like you say, that skin on skin moment when the baby first comes out. That's the moment you've been waiting for all those years.
Yeah.
So you didn't feel kind of, I don't know, maybe resentful, or that had maybe affected something between you because you'd missed out on it?
I did a little later on, but at that point, I think I was just relieved I was alive, and that I'd come through it, and I had my baby at long last. It was only later on that, for many years almost, I could never watch a birth on the television or film or something, and I would cry, and I would get actually very angry and say, it's not, flipping like that. But in those early stages, no, I didn't. It was just gratitude, and that remains. I've never criticised any of the staff involved at all, because the outcome was both my son and I survived, and it was just nature that wasn't on my list. Hadn't read the right book.
Yeah.
It was nobody's fault. It just happened.
So I guess apart from that little hiccup, everything's still going well. So we're still on the right track. We've just had a hiccup so far.
Yes.
So let's really get into it now, because things are going to start going wrong. So baby comes home. How are things in the early stages? Say the first couple of weeks.
Exhausting.
Yes.
I'd missed a whole night's sleep with labour. I then had surgery. And a general anaesthetic. I then had a baby that didn't sleep beyond about 2 hours at a time. And I was breastfeeding because, of course, Danny, that was on the list. I had to do it.
Yeah.
I struggled with it to start off with, but once I got into breastfeeding, I loved it. And I will forever be an advocate of breastfeeding. Yet, at the same time, that in my head made me totally and utterly indispensable to this tiny baby. So, who was a very hungry baby. He was quite a fretful baby. My mum said, we love him dearly, but he was a difficult baby. Some people describe their new baby as the very placid, very content. My son wasn't. He was fractious, I would say. And now I realise it was quite possibly because he was picking up on my anxieties and my lack of ability to relax. And because this was, as I've said, late April, and I'm due back at work in September, I put us in this hamster wheel of expectation. That now I've only got 4 months, 3 days, 2 hours, and 37 seconds till I'm back at school. And by, another 2 weeks, he should be doing that. And I even found it a while ago, and I shook my head at myself. I had one of those daily diaries that you fill in the first year of your baby's first year. And on the left-hand side, there was space to fill in every day what's happened. And on the right-hand side was that by this point, your baby should be doing this, your baby should be doing that. And it was almost like, but he's not doing that yet. I haven't done that. Oh dear. And so I think I was putting myself under all this pressure that really I probably didn't have to. Yeah.
So, as is usually the case, I guess, baby comes home, Dad immediately goes back to work. Was that the case for you guys?
Yes, because he was also a teacher as well. And that was okay. What happened, though, is that as the weeks started to go, in the September, of course, we'd had the 6 weeks on holiday all together, which was great, even though none of us were getting that much sleep. But the week that we were due back at school on the Monday, on the Friday, my son was rushed into hospital with very, very ill. And it was literally, we took him to the GP, who said, you go straight from here and you've got a cot waiting for him at the local hospital. Your baby is extremely ill.
What was wrong with him?
They suspected meningitis.
Oh, Jesus. Right, okay.
Yeah. And even now, it can bring tears to my eyes, that journey from the GPs to the hospital, because being told he could have meningitis, I taught children with special needs, with severe and profound learning difficulties, and I knew that some of my pupils had actually been brain damaged through meningitis.
Wow, yeah.
So the whole thing was just dreadful, absolutely dreadful. And I remember almost taking him into the hospital, and there was this team ready to treat him. And they attempted to get a lumbar puncture into him. Oh, it was just pitiful. And I stayed in the hospital 10 days with him, because although I'd started to wean him off me, of course, it was on the list that had to start happening. The doctors at the hospital said, Elaine, your baby needs you 100% now. So I stayed with him the whole time in the hospital, slept on a little put-you-up bed, and was there to breastfeed him morning, noon and night. So they said in the end it was a viral septicemia, not meningitis. Nevertheless, he was a very, very sick little baby, and we almost lost him. So 10 days later, we are both discharged, and I'm due back at work, which, of course, of a baby now waking every hour as opposed to 2 hours, fully dependent on me. So at that point, the GP gave me 2 weeks off to get him weaned off me again.
What was your... how old was your son going to be then by the time you were going back to work?
He should have been 4 or 5 months, so April, May, June, July, August. Yeah, 5 months.
Yeah, so what were your plans going to be then for... Because I'm interested in maybe the support network that you had around you at the time. So was he going to be taken care of by family or going to a nursery?
He was going to a childminder to my parents at some point as well. I openly admit I really wanted to be at home with him, but that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, so I was going to say, why was it that you felt obliged to go back to work rather than just decide to be a full-time mum?
We'd taken on too big a mortgage.
Right, okay. One of the more profound observations I've read about the prevalence of postnatal depression, I wish I could remember where I read this because I thought it was quite an interesting observation, was this idea that, say, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, mums that stayed at home they had a support network around them, in that mothers raised the children together. So mums would go around to each other's houses, and they'd kind of do it in a community kind of aspect, if you like.
Yes.
And also because I think a lot of the husbands had worked together in the same factories and that kind of thing. So communities really were communities. Whereas nowadays, mums are staying at home with a baby completely on their own. They're not going out. They haven't got that kind of support network, and they're only kind of socialising they're doing is maybe through social media. Yeah. I'm wondering what was your dynamic at the time, because you're kind of, if you had a baby in the 90s, you're on the cusp of that, between that the more community-based child rearing of the 80s and before, but just before the internet hits. So, yeah, what was the dynamic like for you? Were you just at home alone? Were family helping you? What was that like?
I actually, again, I'd found out what was going to be around. So I joined some of the local mums and tots groups up at one at her local church. I also had some friends of mine who had babies and toddlers around the same time. So I had a really nice network. I had a car, I could drive. So that enabled me to get out and about. My parents lived only in the same town. My mum-in-law was only about a 20-minute drive away. So I had a good support network around me. I really did. But I take your point for these days. people, you go to the average estate, typical 3-4 bedroom housing estate these days, nice little cul-de-sacs. The chances are people don't actually know even the next door neighbours. And in the morning, all the cars will disappear out, and in the evening, all the cars will come back again. And it's maybe only, summer barbecue time. Maybe people might actually have a chat over the fence. But once it gets to the dark nights, people are in their own little places, and that social isolation is awful. It really is for people. When you do need somebody to say, oh, well, he was sick on this, or just that whole range of uncertainties as a new parent. Is this normal? Should they be doing that? Should they this? Should they whatever? Or we had a really rough night last night. Would you, can I leave mine with you for an hour or whatever? You're right. That doesn't exist as often these days for new mums or dads.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, but you did have a good support network around you.
Mm-hmm.
So,
mm-hmm.
But were you enjoying it? Were you enjoying being a mum at that time? Or is it already not going so well?
In hindsight, I think I had postnatal depression almost from the word go.
Right.
And because of the birth experience, because of my high expectations that weren't met through nobody's fault, really, the biggest thing, Danny, was sleep deprivation.
Yes.
Absolutely. And people can say, oh, you've a new baby, what do you expect? But on top of the what was a traumatic birth, on top of then those early weeks of so many broken nights' sleep, then him being so severely ill, then I had mastitis, which is an infection that you can get when you're breastfeeding, which is so painful. I had 2 or 3 episodes of that, and I persevered feeding him through that, and that's like literally having razor blades on you. It's so painful as a baby feeds when you've got such a heavy infection. I'd persevered through all of that, and yet each time the lack of sleep, I lost so many hours of sleep. I'm a person that doesn't need a great deal, but certainly I would say maybe 7 hours a night is good for me. And I'd get maybe 2-3 hours. But my downfall as well was that everyone was telling me, when baby rests, you do.
Right.
Nope. That was my opportunity. Oh, great, he's asleep. Now I'll just go and hang some washing out.
Yeah.
Now I'll just go and do this. Oh, I'll just do that. Oh, and I better do this and I better do that. And just as I'm thinking, right, I'll sit down now, he'd wake up and it would all start again.
Yeah.
So I was my own worst enemy. And although people were offering, my parents would often say, look, let us have him overnight. Oh, no, you can't. I'm breastfeeding. There's only me that can feed him in the night. So I pushed away the offers of help. And looking back, I probably wasn't really very nice at the time, because I somehow lost me. I was snappy. I was irritable. People, I would say I was not very nice to be around.
Yeah. So when did you finally seek help? And what made you seek help? Was there a specific incident that happened that made you feel like, right, I need to reach out to somebody now?
I had, after my baby was so poorly, and say I was given 2 weeks off work by my GP, and she said to me, I want to see you at the end of the 2 weeks. So I think she'd already twigged that something was, amiss with me. And after those 2 weeks, I went back to her and I never paused for breath. I remember attempting to convince her, oh yes, everything's absolutely fine, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and I never stopped.
What? Sorry, Elaine. Why did you do that?
I think I had an inkling that things weren't right, and I was putting on a big pretense of that I was being superwoman and I could manage all of this.
So is it like, were you sort of feeling maybe a sense of defeat?
I wouldn't say
or
defeat.
Embarrassment?
Yeah, it was the embarrassment, because I genuinely feel I wasn't the type that would get postnatal depression.
Right.
I'd never felt such a time in my life before or since where I really felt like I was beginning to drown somehow.
Yeah.
That the normal everyday things that sounded almost petty, but just sorting out a whitewash from a coloured wash suddenly was a huge undertaking. I used to, I'd make a meal for 10 people without flinching at it and thoroughly enjoy it. And suddenly making beans on toast was too much because I'd stew the beans and I'd burn the toast.
Yeah.
And just everything seemed an endless feeding, changing, and almost like I was constantly on an escalator but getting nowhere. And I was just all over the place, really. So when my GP finally got a word in edgeways, I remember specifically she put a pen down, looked me straight in the eye and said, "Elaine, I feel this is no longer about the traumatic birth. It's not about your baby's illness. I feel this is about you. I feel that you have postnatal depression." I actually felt relief. I really did. And it was because a few days earlier I'd had a rare moment. I'd sat down. I'd blown the dust off the mounting pile of subscription magazines on pregnancy and birth, and I'd read a very tiny paragraph back then on postnatal depression, and it hit me. That's me.
Yeah.
I was so emotional, real emotional roller coaster. I felt this sense of loneliness. I had people all around me, but I felt so lonely. I was aggressive at times, not a bit bad-tempered, when it was just would come from nowhere almost. The irrational thoughts were all over the place. I'd get cross over things that other people would think, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
And then I'd be totally laid back over things that other people are worrying about. Quite neurotic over some things, but it was mainly that really emotional roller coaster, up 1 minute, down the next. I didn't know how my mood would go, so how on earth can anybody else expect to? So when the GP said, "I feel you have postnatal depression," I felt relieved because she continued to say, "It's an illness. You can be treated for it. You will get through this." And she suggested that I had some antidepressants and went to a support group, both of which I was happy to do because I knew I needed help, and I was happy to do whatever that took.
Yeah, but interestingly, it doesn't end there, does it? You still,
No.
things still kind of going downhill afterwards.
Yeah.
So, if you could take us through that, but sort of tie it all together, because, at that point in the story, it sounds like, oh, well, things are going to get better here.
Take the tablets and that's it. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So, what happened and when did it start off okay, and then did it start going wrong again? What happened there?
I think that was a little bit of an up in the fact that, okay, I can take some tablets. Might take a time for them to do anything, but I'll take them. I went to a support group, but the sleep deprivation continued. And I pushed my husband away, who he always needed more sleep than I did. We still had this very fractious baby, so I slept in the spare room so that I was near the baby's room, so I'd be up 2-3 times a night. I then got to the point that why bother sleeping? Because this thing's going to wake me up anyway. So I'd be ironing at 3 a.m. I'd be writing Christmas cards at 2 a.m. And then the following day, my husband would comment, "Oh, I didn't notice you'd done that." "No," would be my reply, "because you never notice anything about me." And I think he went off to work thinking, phew, thank goodness for that. And I still felt this complete and utter sense of shame that, I had it all, didn't I? nice house, loving husband, supportive family, baby I'd always wanted. I taught children with special needs. Why on earth couldn't I cope with my own? I shouldn't have depression. I shouldn't be postnatally depressed. I'm not 16 on benefits in a 1-bedroom flat with an unwanted pregnancy. I shouldn't be like this. So I think I overcompensated then in attempting to prove to everybody, I can do this and I could do that. So instead of resting, I ramped up the activities. So instead of thinking like, right, we need some groceries and letting my husband go, I'd say, no, it's okay. I'll go. I'll take the new baby and my 80-year-old elderly grandparents. They need their shopping as well. And we'll go to an out-of-town supermarket. And I look back now at that period and I just want to shout at myself, Elaine, stop it.
Yeah.
But I didn't. And I did it. It was as if on a sliding scale, I slid it up to let's do 99% of activities all of the time.
What was the motivation for that? Were you trying to, like, I don't know, prove to other people that you were fine, or were you just trying to prove it to yourself? Or
I think probably a bit of both, really.
Yeah. Also, a bit of a tricky question to answer this, I suppose. But were you building up any sort of resentment towards the baby during that period?
Not at that point. No. I was finding it very hard work. And my usual positive and optimistic self, I think, was struggling.
Right.
But I still was prepared to be that optimistic person about it all, because I knew that he was growing all the time. He was changing all the time. And therefore, hopefully, I would for the best. And I just kept persevering. As I say, it was the sleep deprivation that just got worse and worse, until I got to the point I literally could not relax anymore. I'd lost that ability to sleep as well. And that became my biggest downfall.
Yeah, so, well, we're aiming quick towards rock bottom now. So, yeah, if you could kind of take us through that most intense period, how you got there and what exactly happened? What was rock bottom for you?
Rock bottom was a week before Christmas, and I'd had a lovely morning with my son. Some days you do with depression. You almost can open one eye and think, how am I feeling today? And, yeah, actually, I think I'm all right. Other mornings, it's like you've a lead jacket on. And although your brain's telling you should get up and you have to get up, you really feel you can't. And it's tough. This particular day, I felt okay. I had a pleasant morning downstairs with my son. And just before lunchtime, I thought, yeah, we better get dressed. And literally, as I walked up the stairs with him, I had that moment where it just, I guess, snapped. And at that precise moment, it was as if all of the months of pure exhaustion just came crashing down on me. And of course, I would never, ever condone anyone who harms a child. I now have to admit how close I came to it. At that moment, I could have just thrown him down the stairs, smashed his head against the wall, as the thought occurred to me that this thing has ruined my life.
So was it, when you say that you remember the moment up on the stairs, was it, was the baby kind of, going ape and
No. He was in a lovely, happy mood, and so was I.
And it just came out of the blue?
It just
wow.
Smack. And I had this overwhelming urge to hurt him, and thank goodness that I had a shred of rational thought left, put him in his cot and closed the door.
Right.
Because I knew I just had to be away from him. And I then attempted to get someone to come. And while I was waiting, I sat at the top of the stairs, rocking myself forward and backwards just to soothe myself. And it turned from forward to backwards to side, and I learned to self-harm, which as I smacked my head against the wall. And all I can put it down to was the fact I wanted my brain to stop. I didn't want to die. I just wanted it to switch off and stop. So I went through the next 24 hours of finding all kinds of different ways to hurt myself.
Sorry, is this someone come to collect the baby and then you were left at home by yourself, right?
Yeah, my husband came, took the baby to my parents and came back, got the GP out to see me, who just said I was overreacting to the pressures of motherhood. This was a different GP, by the way.
Right.
Gave me a slight sedative. When I came around, I remember my dad being there, and he just said, "Oh, come on, love, this isn't like you. Pull yourself together," and attempted to give me a hug, and I literally sunk my teeth into his hand.
Wow.
I adore my parents, and to think the pain they must have been going through was, now I just think, oh my goodness, that's horrendous, absolutely horrendous for them. I was given another sedative and I woke in the early hours, and it was that really lovely, fine, gentle rain. And I just had this urge to go for a walk. Just thought it looks nice. So in the early hours of that December morning, wearing simply a night dress, nothing on my feet, nothing else, just walked out the house, left the front door wide open. And there, but for the grace of God, go I. When I read the dreadful stories, not stories, but the reporting in the papers of a new mum's body found on a railway line, new mum's body found on a motorway. That could have been me, had the geography would have been different. And I wandered up to the church where I've been going to mums and tots. I'm not a firm believing Christian, yet I had seen in some of the Christians at that group a peace of mind, and that's what I was looking for. And they found me curled up on a church doorstep. Had geography been different and there been a motorway or railway line, that night my life could have ended.
So is that the period of, is it called Puerperal Psychosis?
Yeah.
Why is it called that? Do you know why it's called that?
Puerperal is a word that refers to postnatal work, really. It's another term for that. And psychosis is like other psychotic illnesses, where you can literally flip from rational thought to being off this planet with other thoughts. And when they'd found me and the following morning, the community psychiatrist came to see me. I remember he had all due respect, Danny, a beard. He had a tweed jacket with leather patches on the elbows.
I don't have those. Go on.
Oh, that's good. And he sat at the side of my bed. I remember him saying to me, "Oh, yes, Mrs. Hanzak, you've been displaying some bizarre behaviours. In my opinion, you need some psychiatric care in hospital. And if you don't want to go, we can make you." Wow. And I remember looking at him thinking, me, bizarre behaviours. And this is coming from a guy in December in the UK who's wearing open sandals and socks. And he was. And yet the next minute, I'm, inflicting self-harm on myself and having all these really, really, as he was right, bizarre behaviours and thoughts.
So, sorry, so that period of 24 hours, now, do you actually remember this, or has this been told to you by other people because you were...
I remember it.
You remember it. At the time that you were doing all these things, did it feel reasonable? You didn't. Were you lacking any self-awareness?
Yes. No, I was aware of everything I was doing. It just seemed right at the time.
Right.
It just, that was, my brain had got addled by that point. Puerperal psychosis, the incidence of it is actually, they reckon, between 1 in 500 to 1 in 1,000 births. Usually happens within the first few days or hours post-delivery as either an ongoing episode of bipolar or the onset of bipolar disorder, or just due to a huge change in hormonal levels as a result of the birth. So my case of puerperal psychosis arguably wasn't textbook in that it happened 7 months postnatally. But I was still given that diagnosis because the as he said, the bizarre behaviours I was displaying, the psychotic thoughts, the wandering, the self-harm, all of these different things, the desire to hurt my baby, were classic, well, some of the symptoms of puerperal psychosis. And because it happened within the first 12 months postnatally, it still was given that diagnosis.
Wow. Okay, so the guy with the sandals and socks has recommended or threatened to send you to a psychiatric hospital.
Yeah.
Did you accept this willingly, or did you have to get, what's the word, committed or
sectioned?
Sorry. Yeah.
No, I didn't. You would have thought he'd just said, Elaine, we've offered you now an all expenses 2 weeks luxury cruise. Go and pack. Because I honestly packed with that much enthusiasm.
Right.
I'd got to the point. Have you seen the Monty Python films where there's one with a woman in a pit, and the rest of the people are stoning her to death? They're all throwing stones at her.
I don't know this one.
But go on. Right. Okay. But that's how I felt at home. It was like I was in this pit and all these thoughts were stones raining down on me that I've got to do the washing, I've got to do this, I've got to go back to work, I've got to go back to school, the hoovering needs doing, the baby needs changing, the car needs what, there's just this shower of thoughts all the time.
Yep.
And I just wanted it all to stop. And I'm all for care in the community, but sometimes I feel when you get as ill as I did, you need scooping up. You need putting somewhere where not even being asked, do you want to drink tea, coffee, milk, sugar? But, Elaine, here's a drink it.
Yeah.
For a certain time, that's what I needed. And so I went very willingly. Yet now I was still breastfeeding my son at this point. But the psychiatrist said that because I'd threatened to harm him, and also I'd chosen a bad time, it was Christmas, and they didn't have the staffing for the mother and baby unit, I would be admitted on a general psychiatric ward without my son.
Right.
So breastfeeding literally stopped overnight, which I now know could have actually made my mental health far worse.
Interesting.
Not to mention the impact on my son as well.
Yeah. What was I think when people think of psychiatric units, I think they immediately imagine, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or Girl Interrupted.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your experience there? How long were you there for?
I was there for 2 months, and it had been a Victorian asylum. So it was one of those very austere buildings from the outside, with the very long corridors with the white and green tiles. Mm. And I remember walking down those corridors, and in my mind I could hear and see like the voluminous figures in big white straight jackets, and I don't know, the doors seemed to slam like prison doors, and yet I wanted to be there. And it was in the process of being run down to be demolished, and a great big new hospital was due to be built the following year. So again, you see, Danny, I'd chosen the wrong time. I was a year too soon.
Yeah.
So the whole place had that feel of being run down, of, in the new hospital will be this service and that service, but for now you've just got this.
Right.
And my favourite place, I've never been a smoker, but within the ward there was like a little self-contained room where all the smokers sat. And that seemed to be the best place. And I would just go in there because it felt like you were part of something. But I was on a ward with ladies who had dementia, alcoholism, schizophrenia, just a whole range of psychiatric problems. And yet I was quite happy to be there.
Yeah, was it an intimidating experience? Was it scary? Did you feel like you were being controlled? Or did you feel like this is exactly what you need? And maybe, I'm assuming it gave you plenty of opportunity for sleep.
It did, but I still had difficulty sleeping because I'd had 7 months of sleep deprivation. So you can't just go to bed and sleep. Mm. And some of those first nights actually were quite torturous because I had all this milk that had nowhere to go. So that was a challenge. And those nights were very, very painful, and I ended up often self-harming again because I couldn't get to sleep and I got cross with myself. So I would start kicking myself and then headbutting the bedside table, all of these different things. And at times I know I even attempted to attack the staff who were trying to stop me hurting myself. And I just feel awful about that now. I didn't want to hurt them. They were in the way of me hurting me.
Yeah.
I just had to get my brain to stop.
Now, interestingly, correct me if I'm wrong, but the turning point for you was receiving ECT, or electroconvulsive therapy. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I tried various medications, some of which are so scary, it's like your whole body's been flung from one side of the room to the other. Others I had like an allergic reaction to. And in the end, they decided that it was worth trying ECT with me. And here I am. What happened with that, I remember about 6 of us from the ward would all be taken out together like in a little crocodile to a building on the outside of the main of the ward. And I can see the red plastic chairs now that we'd wait. And each of us would go in one by one. We'd lie on this bed. I can see now my trainers would take them off, lie back, and there'd be 4 people round me. And be told, you feel a little scratch, Elaine, and the tap on the back of the hand. And then it happened. That wonderful drifting off feel through the anaesthetic.
Oh, so yeah, just for people that don't know the way ECT is administered, you go under general anaesthetic. It's not, they don't pin you down and just strap a helmet to your head.
No, you get the general anaesthetic, and that drifting off feel was like, nectar, because that's what I'd lost the ability to do. I could not relax like that. So when you come round from the treatment, at first you have quite a big headache, and you have almost like little rosy cheeks. And that feel in the olden days, I certainly remember Kit Kat wrappers used to be in foil. It was a bit like if you'd accidentally got a bit of that between your teeth, and almost like, ooh.
Oh, yeah.
Feel. But after each treatment, the headache got less and less. But what I found the big difference made was that when I then was in my bed on the ward at night, I would visualise walking back outside, sitting on the red chair, sitting on the bed, taking my trainers off, and imagining the tap on my hand and that floating off feeling. And because I could imagine it so vividly, guess what? I relaxed and I slept.
So was there a very kind of tangible difference when you woke up after receiving the ECT? I mean, aside from the headache and when that had worn off, did you feel the depression sort of lifting, the fog lifting?
It did, in the fact that it was more that I began wanting my life back again.
Right.
Whereas before the ECT, everything had felt too much. And I still thought strange things, did strange things. And even though I was allowed home at times, I'd come home and I'd just say, take me back. There's too much to do. I can't do it all. Take me back, which must have been so horrible for my husband. But after each ECT, I'd suddenly think, do you know what? I think I could manage at home. I'd actually enjoy making a meal. I might this, I might that. And bit by bit, I wanted to see and spend time with my son again. Yeah.
So was it that the 2 months that you spent there, when it was time for you to be discharged, was that because the I don't know, maybe your time limit had run out, or was you ready to go then?
I was ready to go.
Right.
And I applaud the way that they did the discharge in the hospital. Unlike a physical illness, when so many days post-op, stitches are out, another 2 days, you go home. With a mental illness, no one can put that time limit on. And that's difficult for everybody. And yet, once I started to have the ECT, as I say, increasingly I wanted to be at home. And so it was a staggered discharge. So you could have one night at home and then go back to the hospital for 2 or 3 nights, and then maybe 2 nights at home and then go back. So over a period of about 3 weeks, I had that gradual discharge. So by my last trip in, it was really just to collect a few bits and pieces, and I went back home happily.
Wow. So yeah, from then on, was it, are we back on the up and up?
Yes, yeah. It wasn't certainly, 0 to 60 in so many weeks. It was still very much a roller coaster ride. What I found happened when I was at my most ill, I had very big peaks of being almost hyper and manic, and then the very, very low troughs. And they were quite closely together. A big up followed by a big down, and lots of ups and downs. The more treatment I got, the more well I got. Those peaks and troughs were not as high, and then they were a lot more spaced apart. So I began to function a lot more on a normal level. And the biggest difference was because it was rational thought.
Yeah.
So if I then did have an upset day, it was because of X, Y, Z, not just because my brain had decided it wasn't a good day. And little by little, I got my life back again.
Yeah. Did you ever have? Do you remember having any particular moment where you sort of looked around yourself and thought, I'm back to normal?
It happened a bit later on when because I had a staggered return to work as well, and there was a moment where my son was outside with his dad and washing the car, and on a Sunday morning I noticed there was a service to commemorate World Mental Health Day, which happens every year on October the 10th, and it was at the church where they'd found me, and I just felt I should go. And I walked up to the church. It was on the top of a hill close to where we lived. And I went to that service, and I sat in the congregation listening to members of the public, members of the clergy, and some people from the NHS talking about mental illness and the fact that it affects 1 in 4 of us. Yet very few people are prepared to talk about it. And I got this urge that started at my toes and felt like something or somebody was just telling me, get up there, girl. So I did. And I literally walked up the aisle, said to the vicar who knew me, can I share my story? And I stood in the pulpit looking down thinking, what the flip am I doing here? Because at my worst, I couldn't even answer the phone in my own house. It would be ringing and I'd be looking at it and just couldn't answer it. So for me to be then putting myself in a position where I'm actually looking at this sea of expectant faces was a huge step for me. And I just said, explained in a few moments how ill I had been, yet with time, support and treatment, you can get your life back after a mental illness.
And a new career beckons because
it did.
Then you wrote a book.
That was it. Yeah, because from that, at the end of that service, a lady came up to me and said, Elaine, you're a gift from God. I need a service user to speak at a conference next week. Will you do it? So I said, well, I know if I can get an hour or 2 off school, I will do. So a week later, I'm plonked on top table of a conference for 250 people talking about mental health in the area. And I gave a 10-minute talk on what had happened to me, the things that I felt had helped and the things that could have been better about my treatment. And from that, 7 months later, I was invited to speak to about 700 nurses down in London. And each time I spoke, people said, Elaine, you should write a book because you give people so much hope. So being the compliant person I am, I went off and wrote a book. And I learned that I couldn't do it overnight. It was one of those things I just chipped away at little by little over about 4 years, I would say. And it was very cathartic as well because I'd written lots of diaries while I was ill. We had my son's diary as well that my husband had filled in while I was too unwell to do so. Bless him, he'd kept up with that. So I had lots of documentation to go by. And I found I let go of a lot of the upset, the anger. And each chapter I wrote, my husband would read, because I would never share anything that would upset him. And credit to him, there was very, very little in that manuscript that he asked me to leave out. And I'm very grateful to him for letting our story be out there. Because it was finally published in 2005, called Eyes Without Sparkle, and it's been sold all around the world. It really has.
Wow.
And I'm very humbled to be able to say that I know, because they've told me, there are at least 7 ladies still alive, because my story has literally given them the hope to continue when they were in a point where they felt their life wasn't worth continuing with.
That's awesome. Yeah, before I want to kind of go over giving some advice, some pointers to mums to kind of avoid this, but just out of interest, what's your relationship like with your son now, and what does he think of all this, having heard your story? What does he make of it all?
My instant reaction then was a big beaming smile on my face. My son has been incredible through all of this. He was 7 when I got the book contract by a big publishing house. What happened with the publishing journey was the big conference I spoke at, actually it was the year 2000. At that conference, there were the big cheeses of the nursing world at the time. Chief Nursing Officer, for example, of the UK, people like that. And when I got my manuscript and I'd finished it, I actually sent it to some of those people and said, would you have a look at this? They gave me glowing reviews on it and suggested a publisher for me. So that's how my journey to publishing went. And I explained to my son as a 7-year-old that, Mummy had been very poorly with her mind, her brain when he was little. And because I'd got better, we wanted to let other mums and dads know that you can get better through it. So bless him, he actually drew the front cover, which was a very, typical child's drawing of mummy, daddy and baby. And the detail on it is quite uncanny, because he's done it that my hand isn't actually holding the pushchair that he's put the baby in, and different things. So it's very insightful as a 7-year-old. So he was a primary age child whose mum then ended up on BBC Breakfast this morning, national and local press, about the fact that I'd been so mentally ill when he was born. So he has grown up with a far greater awareness about mental health and illness than many children. And also because I gave up teaching the year that my book came out, because people wanted me to do the conferences and lectures. So I took a leap of faith, a risk financial risk as well, to give up teaching in 2005, and I've never been back in a school classroom since.
Wow.
And at the same time, my son has grown up. He's just literally graduated with a first class honours degree in photography. And he has been amazing through all of this, because even I remember him as a 16-year-old, I was invited to speak on BBC Breakfast again, and it was actually on child protection issues. And I admitted to the nation how I'd wanted to throw my baby down the stairs, etc. And it was only afterwards I thought, of course, in the interim, social media had expanded so much. And I knew that it would be all over there that, I'd attempted to, in essence, kill my baby. And there he was as a sixth form student. So I messaged him and said, I really want to speak to you about the programme, because, of course, he was excited for me going on BBC again. And the message came back, I can't speak now, Mum. What is it? I said, I'm just worried about something. I said, bless him, he replied back, is it the stairs thing? Because I'm fine with that. I thought, blimey. But what I also made a point of was sharing all the wonderful testimonials I've had over the years, and I continue to do so with him, to show him that by us as a family sharing our story, we have actually helped many, many people. and the fact that the stigma isn't as great as it was, still there to a certain degree, about not talking about it. And as my son has said, he's grown up. He often would say to me, "Mum," he says, "why is it my friends always come to me, with all their troubles and things?" And yeah, he's the absolute joy of my life. He really is. I'm extremely proud of him and continue to be proud of him, because even now at 21, he still is okay with our story out there.
Great ending. Good job you didn't chuck him down the stairs, eh?
It is, definitely, yes.
So,
yes.
as far as giving pointers, I think a good way to frame this is something you said before. For the best kind of tips that you'd give somebody to sort of inoculate themselves from developing postnatal depression,
Mm-hmm.
what would you, if you could sit down with Elaine from back then,
Mm-hmm.
before she's had the baby, what advice would you give to her?
Expect the unexpected, and that a new baby, well, starting with the birth, might not go to the plan. And I would recommend to people you change your language. Instead of having a birth plan, you have a birth library, which was an idea put to me by another midwife called Debbie Gould. And she feels that, and she's right, a lot of women feel they've failed at their birth if it hasn't gone the way they were expecting it to. And, women's bodies are incredible things. And some people have an easy birth and an easy labour, other people don't. And this isn't the time and the place to go into, what makes a good midwife or, the cuts, etc. No, that doesn't matter. Just down to the essence of your body might not respond the way that you would expect it to. So therefore, if you have a library of the pain relief or the library of things that you want to do, it doesn't matter if it's not gone to plan of ABC. If you've dipped in at F, at G, at P, at Q, or whatever, it doesn't matter. You've come through it. And to almost have an open view to what can actually happen at the birth would be the first thing. The second thing is that talk about the birth afterwards. I only found out about 10 years on what a retained placenta and a postpartum hemorrhage were when I was actually speaking at a maternity conference. Nobody had actually taken the time to explain to me what had happened, and equally, I never asked. So there was never any knowledge to add to, what had happened, who did what, and why. And also, my marriage didn't survive. And one of the things that always saddens me is that nobody ever considered my husband during that postnatal period either. It was me that got all the attention. He experienced a very, very traumatic birth. Nobody ever talked to him about that. And in the months that followed as well, he was left literally holding the baby. He was never figured. So always remember the dads. Remember the grandparents as well. It's not just the mum that's affected. And more research is showing that the infant can be infected as well. So it's the whole family that we need to look after.
I think for me, Elaine, the two things that kind of stand out from your story is, one would be prioritising sleep.
Yes.
Secondly, it's don't try and be super mum. Like, put that down and go get... Yes. Well, I suppose that fits in with go get some sleep. Yeah, have you got anything specific to say on that?
Do you remember the Disney film 2 or 3 years ago now, Frozen, with the song "Let It Go"?
Yes.
That would be my encouragement to new mums. Let it go and be in the moment. I've learned a lot in the last few years, and it's something these days I attempt to do far more, as opposed to always thinking and planning ahead that I've got to this, I've got to that, I'm going to be doing. It's about actually what's happening right now. And I look back on the Elaine that had that new baby, and I was forever waiting to turn the next page in the diary. When will he sit up? When will he this? When will he that? Let's just enjoy now. And knowing that, I've seen a baby today that I last saw a few months ago. That baby in arms now is sitting up and smiling and starting, to communicate and all of these things. So, wow, that baby stage is so short-lived. It really is. Cherish it. Ask for help. I also now look back and I think, do you know what, actually, Danny, I was quite selfish because it was my baby. Right. Not even our baby, my baby. I had to feed him. I had to change him. And my younger sister had a little girl 7 years ago called Sophie, and she should have been called Joy because that's what she is to us all. And my sister has I actually looked after Sophie overnight when she was only about 3 weeks old. And I thought, blimey, I actually pushed away my family, partly through illness, but I didn't realise what joy that new baby was to everybody. And actually, had I shared him a lot more, and let my mum and dad have him for the afternoon, I could have had a rest or do whatever, and they would have thoroughly enjoyed that precious time. So if you have got family and friends nearby, let them have that time with the baby as well, because it's precious. It really is very, very precious.
Oh yeah, I can certainly testify to that. I mean, my little boy is about to turn 7, which is insane. I can't believe that.
Yes.
And my little girl just had a little girl. She's approaching 5 months already, and like you say, she's already sitting up and shouting and about to crawl and stuff. And God, it doesn't have to go quick. Go quick.
It does. I know.
So, Elaine, before I let you go, I'm going to subject you, like I do everybody else, to my quick fire questions.
Okay.
Firstly, aside from your own, which I will include in the show notes, do you have any book recommendations on this topic or anything else you feel would be of value to the listeners?
There is an organisation called the Maternal Mental Health Alliance, which was formed a number of years ago because for so long, so many of us have been shouting out that this is an area, these are services that need more of. And I'm pleased to say that finally we are getting more resources, more funding for help for families out there. So if you actually Google Maternal Mental Health Alliance, that is where people will find all of the main policy documents, the main groups, the main charities. Have a look there. That would be the main website I would recommend for people.
Okay. Oh, also I think worth mentioning is, and maybe we'll cover this in another podcast in the future, but you've written a second book, which is
yes, I have.
about considering a second child if you've experienced postnatal depression in the past. So
yeah, not just postnatal depression. It's really any perinatal mental illness. Okay. Perinatal, it refers to both antenatal, which is while you're pregnant, and postnatal. So perinatal is the new term, well, not particularly new term, but is the term that really we want to push in the media because some women suffer very much in the antenatal period as well. And I wrote my second book because many people, with me sharing my story, so many people I've been humbled have shared theirs with me. And one question that cropped up time and time again is, what do you do next time round, Elaine, when you've had a tough time first time or a subsequent pregnancy? Or what if you get unexpectedly pregnant again? So I would love to do a second podcast with you because that, yes, is a whole new story.
Yes, it is. It is.
Yeah.
Okay. If you could take the reins of power at the Department of Health, what policy would you implement to improve the mental well-being of the general public? And I always tell people, think very dictatorially. Don't worry about budgets and that sort of thing. Think benevolent dictator.
Okay, I would send every new parent on a postnatal course because everybody gears towards the birth in the antenatal period, and that's understandable. It's a bit like when you get engaged. You wouldn't actually want someone to say, oh, that's fantastic, and here's the card for an excellent divorce lawyer. You don't actually want to know, do you, that actually, it might not be quite the roses round the door and the helium balloons and how Hello and OK magazine make new babies look. It's warts and all, or it can be. So let's have some national education in those first couple of months to say, right, you've had the baby, you've had the birth. Let's talk about the birth to start off with. Let's, deal with that. Now let's talk about changes. Let's talk about expectations versus reality. There is actually an excellent book called Supporting Women in the Postnatal Period by a lady called Lynn Bertram, who does, or certainly did at one time, run courses on this. Excellent book. And I just think we don't have a debrief almost for parents, or, when you have got through that birth bit, and it is about the endless, or it seems, nappy changes. Or, yes, you were going to breastfeed, but you've had to bottle feed. How are you feeling about that? How are you coping with that? How are you dealing with it? How do you cope with other people saying, oh my goodness, are you not breastfeeding? Or, oh, what would you do that for? How do you cope with other people's judgments? And just have the opportunity for a few weeks to air what are normal thoughts, but if they're left to fester, can actually build up. Or build down, as it were, into a depression and anxiety. Let's get normality so that instead of people worrying that, I shouldn't be doing it, shouldn't be doing this, shouldn't be doing that. Do you know what? It's okay to feel like that. It's okay to be like this. It's okay to say, hey, it's not what I thought it would be, and I could do with some help here.
Yeah, maybe let the dads go along to this.
And the dads as well. Yeah. Because that, I know you've spoken to Mark Williams, the dads need consideration as well.
Yeah. Okay, what, if anything, keeps you up at night?
I would have to say, in all honesty to that, would be finance.
Yeah.
Because I adore my speaking. But it has and continues to be a challenge because, I gave up a good teaching salary.
Yeah.
So it will be finance.
Yeah, I've got to say, Elaine, with me kind of entering this domain and wondering whether to kind of make a career of it, I'm wondering whether it's a terrible financial idea. So,
I've struggled with it over the years, and up until last year, I had a role as a part-time PA. Circumstances have changed that, and I admit now I juggle my what appears to be a glamorous speaking career with working in a local bakery and a local convenience store.
Yeah.
And it's okay. I enjoy it. It won't be forever, and for now, it's okay. But I would give people the air of caution that in order to help others, you have to help yourself first. And I can't help other people, which I want to do and will continue to do so if I'm keeping myself awake every night worrying about paying the bills.
Yeah, I do. I've thought about this, and it's a whole other conversation. But I do think it for some reason mental health seems to be one that people can't make a career out of, which is. It's a shame, really, because I think if there was a monetary incentive there, I think there's a lot of people out there that could contribute quite a lot to the industry, but it just doesn't seem available.
Yeah, and there are speakers on so many different topics. If you're a business speaker, boy, you can make an absolute mint. Something you're right about mental health. Is it because it's not sexy? Is it because it's not seen as being economically viable? Yet I know with my story how expensive I was. To society, to the school I worked at, the loss of earnings and different things with my illness, not to mention the expense to the NHS. And yet we are fighting still in our society, and increasingly the absences by mental health and the fact that people are scared to admit. So why are we not valuing the expertise of people with lived experience to say, hey, look, because someone ignored it or because I was too ashamed to admit to it, this is ending up costing so much more than it need to be. We need to be valued. We really do.
Yeah, interestingly, just quickly, I recently invited somebody, an academic, onto the podcast, and she asked me if it was commercial at all, whether it's being monetized. And I said, well, it is. I upload it to YouTube and it's monetized and I've got ads on there. But since August last year on YouTube, I've made £14.
Yeah,
But, she wasn't happy with that, and so she refused to come on the podcast because it was commercialised. So interesting.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
These are the big ones now.
Okay.
What's the best piece of life advice anyone's ever given you?
It was actually by somebody dying.
Okay.
Which in my second podcast, I'd like the opportunity to talk about. But when somebody you love just is there 1 minute and not the next, it makes you realise how precious life is. And the fact that we have to live for today, live for the moment, wear your best underwear all the time. But, what are you saving that best dress for? Why do you only wear a certain aftershave for special occasions? Every day should be a special occasion. We put off and we don't know what's round the corner. And I think increasing society, because of social media and because of the terror threats and all these innocent people who will have left their house, or in the case of the fire recently, didn't even leave their house and their life ended. We need to enjoy today, appreciate the loved ones that you have around you, and be with them. Put your phone away. Put your social media away, and be with people and be present with them.
Yeah, every day should be a special occasion. I like that.
Yeah, yeah.
What mistakes do you continue to make despite knowing better?
Still worrying about money.
No, that fits the last two questions perfectly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do my utmost best to practice what I preach, and I think it does come back to I have to look after myself so that I can look after others. My brother was very, very recently dangerously ill, and I knew, in fact, putting this podcast was something that I said, for now, I just have to say no to. There will come a time when I'm ready to do it again. And I had to almost withdraw back into my immediate family while my brother was literally having his life saved. And I'm glad I did that, because now, these 3-4 months on, as he's recovering, I'm able to re-emerge as well. Had I just continued to think, no, I have to do that podcast, I've got to write that blog, I've got to do this, I would have crumbled again.
Yeah, falling back into old habits.
Yeah, and I'm actually quite proud of myself now that I have the ability sometimes to say no. Not never, but not now. And I just have to remind myself of that every now and then still.
Okay, final 3.
Okay.
What part of your career are you most proud of?
And
that can include motherhood.
Yeah. Being a mum, I wrote a blog this week actually about what would you like to be remembered for? And my son read it through and he said, actually, Mum, he said, I'd always remember you as a brilliant homemaker. And I thought that was really sweet. So yeah, being a mum, through it all, that's my biggest thing I'm proud of. I think I'm a pretty good daughter as well. To my adored mum and dad. And my speaking and my writing career, through sharing my story of perinatal mental illness, leaves me at time in complete and utter awe, because I know it helps people in the most unexpected places. And even now, I can fill the shelves at the shop where I work, and somehow get into conversation with people, and they'll leave with a smile on their face. And I like to do that. The other thing is so at that level, it's good to just make someone smile. Then I can go and speak at a conference for 500 people. And it will be so wonderful for a healthcare professional to say to me afterwards, Elaine, thank you. You've made me think about my practice. I'm doing an awful lot of things right. and there are things that I can do that little bit better to make life that little bit better for other people. And that's what I'm proud of.
Outside of family and career, what investment of time or money has brought you the most joy or fulfillment?
Say that one again, please.
Yeah, outside of family and career, because they're the ones everyone defaults to.
Yeah.
So excluding family and career, what investment of time or money has brought you the most joy or fulfillment?
It would be sharing my story in whatever shape or form that takes.
I'm not going to give you that one, Elaine, because that's career. Any little purchases or anything?
It's not just career. It's not just career to me. I would do it without the money.
Yeah.
I've always said that I would love somebody to come along and say, look, Elaine, here's a basic salary for you to do 2 talks a month. You can have that as long as every other opportunity that comes up for this you do for free. I would jump at that, Danny. Yeah. I would love to do it. To me, it's not about money. It's not about a career. It's about, as I said in the introduction, it's about helping people or minimizing the risk to other people so they don't have to go through the hell that we did.
Okay. Finally, the big one.
Yeah.
What do you think is the key to happiness?
Living in the moment.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Elaine Hanzak, thank you very much.
You are welcome.
Is there any links you'd like to direct the listeners to? And if you're on social media, this is your little moment to plug away like crazy.
Okay, well, I have my website, which is very easy, and it's just hanzak.com, which is spelled Hanzak. And because I have an unusual name of Elaine Hanzak, you'll find me on Facebook on Elaine Hanzak. I have a personal page and also a business page. I have a Twitter account, which is Elaine Hanzak. I have Skype, which is elaine.hanzak. And I have LinkedIn, which is Elaine Hanzak. So as long as you remember the name Elaine Hanzak, I think you'll pretty well find me. Yeah,
I think having that unusual surname makes it easy to bag all the domain names for yourself, doesn't it?
Yes, although my son's a little bit cross about that now. So he wants them.
Right, Elaine Hanzak, thank you very much.
You are very welcome, Danny. Thank you.
Okay, folks, if you enjoyed this episode, actually, for those of you who didn't enjoy this episode, you guys can bugger off and skip this bit because it doesn't apply to you. But if you did enjoy this episode and you'd like to help support this podcast, there are a number of ways you can do so. You could blast out a little mention on social media saying, yeah, check this knobhead out, he's actually pretty good. You could like our Facebook page or leave us a review there, even better. Just search for My Own Worst Enemy on Facebook. I'm sure we'll pop up. You could leave us a positive review on iTunes or Stitcher or whichever podcast service you happen to use. It's always a nice way of encouraging new listeners to give us a whirl. Or, if you're feeling particularly generous and you feel that this podcast is genuinely adding some value and you'd like to support it in a more long-term sense, then you can become a subscriber for as little as £1 a month. Or you could just make a one-off donation, again, for as little as £1. So, yeah, if you'd like to sponsor the podcast, just go to myownworstenemy.org/support, but only if you can afford it, and, no donations from stolen credit cards either, please. Can't be arsed with that hassle. So, yeah, plenty of things to keep you busy there while I go busy myself putting the next episode together. So, in the meantime, as I always say, behave yourselves, but not too much, and I'll see you again next time.